So in today's video, I want to talk about Ben Shapiro, because Ben Shapiro is actually a little different to many of the other right-wing commentators in the US, because while those other commentators are often staunchly anti-vegan, Ben has actually expressed far more favorable views towards veganism. In fact, when Ben has been directly questioned around the ethics of what we do to animals and the consumption of meat, he has openly admitted that he's a hypocrite, which is actually really interesting. It's especially interesting because even though Ben has openly admitted he's a hypocrite, he still is not vegan. So what gives? Well, in today's video, I want to try and find out. So we're going to talk about what Ben has to say. We're going to react to a variety of different clips of Ben talking about veganism and animals and different components around this conversation. And we're going to try to explore why Ben still remains such a hypocrite. And I actually think this conversation is really interesting because I strongly believe that one of the reasons why Ben still hasn't made this change relates to a much larger conversation around meat and its supposed cultural importance in places like the US. And not only cultural importance, but very specifically politically cultural importance. So we're going to talk about how red meat has become this weaponized symbol of right-wing politics and what that means for identity politics, and ultimately what that means for right-wing commentators like Ben Shapiro, who are appealing to a conservative audience, and this conservative audience will have very strong beliefs around certain things, one of those things being meat consumption. And so how does that relate to Ben's views around his own personal meat consumption? As you can tell, there's a few very interesting things to discuss here, and I'm really looking forward to diving deeper in this video. However, before we start reacting to clips of Ben, I just want to introduce the partner of today's video. Because while Ben's eating habits may reek of hypocrisy, there is no need for his armpits to reek of something else. And that's all thanks to Wild. Now, I use Wild products every single day because they're vegan, cruelty-free, gentle on the skin, and importantly, they work amazingly well. Now, believe me, the first time that I used Wild deodorant, I was skeptical. After all, I'd tried many different brands of gentle on the skin deodorant before and had always been left feeling disappointed. But there's a reason that I've been using Wild for years now. Wild also uses a combination of reusable cases and compostable bamboo packaging, meaning that we can look after ourselves, the animals, and the planet all at the same time. Wild's products include deodorant, body wash, and lip balms, and they also have a new selection of summer scents, which includes Cucumber Cooler, Santorini Sunset, and Peach Iced Tea. Now, personally, I've been loving the Cucumber Cooler scent because it smells so fresh, and it's also perfect for these hotter summer days. Now, importantly, Wild ships worldwide, and they also offer a flexible subscription service, meaning that you can get their products shipped directly to your door. Now, if you want to get Wild products for yourself, well, you can actually get 20% off right now for a limited time only by clicking the link in my description and using the code ED20, or alternatively, you can scan the QR code that's on the screen now. And now, let's see what Ben Shapiro has to say about veganism.
Over the past few years, I've heard you repeatedly predict that in 100 years, all of us are going to be looked back upon as barbarians, and I'm quoting you, barbarians, for eating animals, for eating meat.
I said it's a possibility, yeah.
You've predicted it on 3 separate occasions.
I said probably, and I think that's probably true, yeah.
Okay, so
sure.
You stand by that statement. Okay, great. And yet you've never suggested that you would take any action on this topic. You've never suggested that you are going to go vegan or even vegetarian. I know. And so my question for you is this. How can you make a career off of preaching personal responsibility while failing to take responsibility for your words on this topic?
So one of the contingencies that would make it an absolute brutality in 100 years is that there's actual sources of animal-like protein that are produced without the use of animals. And that is progressing pretty quickly, right? I mean, you're actually seeing animal protein being produced without the killing of animals. I think that's going to make things a lot easier for people. As far as the vegetarian-vegan question, it's something that I've actually seriously considered. I haven't talked about it publicly a lot, but it's something that I've actually pretty seriously considered because, I mean, frankly, I do think that there are I think that on the list of moral evils in American society, I think that this comes in a far, far cry behind things like abortion, for example, like the killing of human beings in the womb. But if you're going to talk about, but if rightly so, you say, okay, well, make your eating habits adhere to a more moral standard. It's something I'll admit I'm a hypocrite on, and it's something that I've thought about a fair bit. So actually, thank you for urging me to consider my hypocrisy and continuing to move in that direction, because I'm thinking about it seriously.
How can you admit that you're a hypocrite and then continue to how can you
That's what a
preach
hypocrite
personal-
is. I just said I am.
But you're
I mean-
preaching personal responsibility. So what if I said that I was a hypocrite on the pro-life issue? That you say, what if I said, well, I think abortion is wrong, but I'm going to get an abortion. Obviously, I can't.
I'd be saying at least what I would say is you're upholding the right moral standard in your talk, and I wish you would do so in your personal life. And you are free to say the same thing to me about my eating habits.
Now, look, first things first, it is great that Ben is openly admitting that he's a hypocrite. That's actually kind of refreshing. What you would normally expect from something like this is someone asks a question about why aren't you vegan, and the person responding gets ultra defensive and becomes quite nasty and kind of plays to the crowd to try and own or debunk the vegan to get a laugh or to get a whoop and a cheer. That's kind of what you'd expect in an environment like this. So it is refreshing that Ben just says, hey, look, yes, I am a hypocrite. However, I think sometimes people fall into the trap where they think that because they're admitting that they're a hypocrite, that somehow makes them less culpable. Because obviously what needs to happen is you need to recognize you're a hypocrite and then act on that. And what's interesting, I suppose, is that for all of us ethical vegans, there was a point most likely where we realized we were a hypocrite and we were temporarily living in a state of hypocrisy because you're eating a certain way. You then realize that the way you're eating is in violation with the ethics that you should have. You feel like a hypocrite, and then you take the step. You don't just end it there. You realize that state of hypocrisy, and then you act on it. In other words, you become vegan. The problem with Ben is he has never acted on it. He's admitted on a couple of occasions, look, I'm a hypocrite. I've thought about it. Yes, I've considered it. Yes, we're going to look back and say it's barbaric. But then he's never made that step. And I think it's particularly ironic in the case of Ben, because a lot of the values that Ben espouses on his platforms are related to things like personal responsibility, taking ownership for yourself and for your decisions, not relying on others for handouts and for welfare and for support. Basically, you are responsible for yourself, deal with it and act accordingly. That's kind of the personal responsibility line that he speaks about. And yet he's taking no personal responsibility in this moment. He's saying, I'm a hypocrite, but I'm not going to do anything about it. Remember, Ben is the facts over feelings guy. Facts don't care about your feelings. So why isn't he acting on the facts here? Why isn't he acting on the fact that he recognizes he's a hypocrite for objectively truthful reasons, which is there's a lot of violence happening towards animals that he is paying for and that is wrong, and then change accordingly. That's what he should do. That's especially what he should do if he was following the messaging that he puts out there. What's interesting in this clip is not only is he rejecting his own personal responsibility, but he's also making his view around the necessity to stop harming animals conditional. And the condition he's setting out is the condition that we will need something like cell-cultured meat, essentially animal protein, but not from a slaughtered animal. He says that that's one of the contingencies that will need to be in place in order for us to recognize that what we are doing to animals is barbaric. Now, 2 points here. Firstly, that's clearly untrue. We don't need cell-cultured meat to realize that forcing animals into gas chambers is barbaric. We just need a heart and a head, right? That's it. We just need to be intellectually and emotionally honest. And then obviously we can tell that forcing animals into gas chambers, cutting their throats, mutilating them, all of these things is barbaric. We don't need technology and cell-cultured meat to reach that conclusion. So that's very illogical what he's saying. And it's interesting that one of the reasons why he says we'll need something like cell-cultured meat is to make it easier for people. In other words, he's saying that we kind of need handouts, right? We need support. We need, in essence, a kind of symbolic sort of welfare, something to make it easier for us to make this decision. I find that quite interesting because to me, again, that kind of contradicts a lot of what he says. Oh no, we actually do need something from someone else to make this decision easier for us. Because if it's not easy for us, then we shouldn't accept personal responsibility to act in accordance with what is right. And something else that's interesting here is Ben is essentially virtue signaling around this issue, right? He's been asked a question related to ethics and morals. And he's trying to make himself look like a good person. He's trying to present himself as being someone who cares, He says, yeah, I think about this. I've not necessarily spoken about it, but yeah, I've thought about this. And yes, I'm a hypocrite. Yes, it's barbaric. All of these things, right? So he's trying to present himself as being a good person about this issue. I am a good person about this. I do care. It is wrong. I am a hypocrite. But he's accepting no personal responsibility about it. He's just trying to look good, but without doing anything about it. And this is something that the right often criticize the left for, sort of moral grandstanding, paying lip service to issues of ethics and morality, but also not necessarily doing anything about it sometimes. But this is exactly what he's doing. This is what Ben is doing. He's virtue signaling about the ethics around what we do to animals, and at the same time, he's not taking the personal responsibility that he needs to do something about it. And this is also not the only clip where Ben addresses this particular topic.
Turkeys are weird because they have a strangely humanoid aspect to them, kind of walking around carrying what was once alive. It's gruesome and horrifying. I don't think that we should go randomly killing animals or mistreating animals. I feel like this turkey has been sufficiently abused. I think that if we're needlessly killing animals, then I would consider moving away from that. First, let's make sure it's dead. That's the first step. Okay.
So this leads me to the big question. Why isn't Ben vegan then? Now, I strongly believe that one of the main reasons why Ben hasn't made the change yet relates to something called identity politics, which ironically is again something that the right often criticizes the left for, but is of course guilty of as well. Now, what do I mean by this? Well, what I mean is Ben is obviously a right-wing conservative commentator. And so as a right-wing conservative commentator, he's appealing to a certain demographic, a certain audience. Now, in the US especially, but in many places around the world, meat is incredibly symbolic. What it represents transcends beyond just a meal, beyond just the acquisition of calories or nutrition, right? The consumption of meat has so much meaning behind it for so many, especially in a place like America, especially something like red meat. But it's not only the embracing of something like meat, which is culturally important or politically important, it's also the rejection of the alternative, the rejection of the antithesis of what it is that you're celebrating. In other words, the rejection of something like veganism or the motivation towards not giving up meat. Now, this might not even necessarily be a deliberate or manipulative or conscious thing. It could often be a subconscious thing. But I think part of this is the idea that Ben is playing into his right-wing personality. He is appealing to his audience. And to further develop this point, I want to show you an advert that Ben did for a meat company.
I've debunked communism, JFK conspiracies, and other disputed topics. I haven't yet debunked the huge lies surrounding store-bought meat. Grocery stores and leftists, they'll tell you to buy that grass-fed, super omega, morally superior, equity-bringing Live Your Truth beef. They push the lie that those labels mean anything at all, but they don't mean a thing. They're often slapped on products imported from overseas with more frequent flyer miles than you have. Here is the label that matters: 100% American meat, and Good Ranchers has it. Good Ranchers, only sources from farms and ranches right here in the United States. Maybe you thought a steak cooking over a fire couldn't get more American. It can with any box of Good Ranchers. I'm told the iron levels of Daily Wire employees are at an all-time high due to just how good Good Ranchers really is. Ditch the mystery meat aisle. Order from Good Ranchers today. Trust where your meat comes from. You wouldn't invite a stranger to dinner, so don't invite strange meat.
But hang on a minute. Ben says he's a hypocrite for eating animal products. But he's promoting animal products. He's selling animal products to people. But he's a hypocrite, right? He thinks that what we do to animals, we will look back on as being barbaric. But then he's promoting it. So in other words, to put it simply, Ben is saying he's a hypocrite, but not only is he paying for animal products himself, he's accepting money from the industry to promote these products to others to further generate revenue for the industry that he says in the future we will look back on and view as being barbaric. What does that say about Ben? This advert is super disingenuous and super misleading because it implies that it's really hard to get American meat, and American supermarkets are filled with strange foreign imports from these places that aren't like America. That's just not true. America, one of the things it sadly does, one of the many things it sadly does, is it produces huge quantities of meat. And huge quantities of meat are sold in American supermarkets. It's a disingenuous advert because it's promoting a false premise. But let's develop off that point because it's also irrelevant whether you're buying American meat or Russian meat or British meat or Australian meat or Chinese meat or Saudi Arabian meat. It doesn't matter. It's immoral. It is wrong. It is animal abuse, it's animal cruelty, and it's not justifiable. So the idea that supporting meat production from the country where you live, the idea that that makes it good is a fallacy. It doesn't. It's still wrong. It just makes you feel better about yourself because you think you can trust the farming processes where you live. But of course, this advert isn't really promoting American meat from the perspective of American meat being more moral or ethical. I mean, they may say that if you ask them, but actually the messaging behind this advert is something else. It's about patriotism. It's about loving your country. The reason you should support this company is because by supporting this company, you're supporting American ranchers. It makes you a patriot. It makes you a God-loving US of A citizen. Basically, it's drumming up all of that right-wing conservative sentiment. It's appealing directly to Ben's audience. And isn't it depressing that, firstly, meat has this cultural significance and this cultural connotation? The fact that it is tied in with the culture wars and is being used as a weapon, as a narrative to further create this left-right binary and this toxic divide and animosity that exists not just in the US, but in so many places around the world. Is it not just so deeply saddening that violence towards animals is being weaponized and used as a product of division for us as humans as well? I find that really, really upsetting. And actually, there is an interesting framing of this message that we often overlook when we talk about patriotism and meat consumption. Because, of course, the advert and the general narrative at play here is portraying meat as being something that's patriotic. But what you therefore have to do is apply that logic consistently. Because if consuming meat makes you a patriot, that means that causing harm to animals makes you a patriot. It means being needlessly violent to animals makes you a patriot. If meat makes you a proper US of A citizen, then essentially what we're saying is causing suffering and harm to animals makes you a good old-fashioned US of A citizen. I think that's actually a really disturbing way of viewing patriotism in this way, right? If we were to frame it that way, I'm sure many more people would reject this narrative. Because interestingly, let's talk about Kristi Noem, the South Dakota governor who was internationally condemned by the left and the right because she shot and killed her dog and also a goat. But the logic of, hey, causing animals makes you a patriot must surely mean that Kristi Noem is a very strong patriot because, hey, she caused needless violence and death towards animals. And I also find it really disappointing that this kind of messaging works on people, that people are so susceptible to this way of thinking. I find it really disappointing that there will be people watching this advert of Ben promoting this company, and it will be the fact that he's talking about American meat and supporting American ranchers and all of these things. That will be what appeals to them. And they'll go, hey, yeah, I want to be an American. I want to be a patriot. I want to be a God-fearing, God-loving US of A citizen. So I should buy this meat. I should support this company. I mean, it's really manipulative and deceptive branding. And unfortunately, it's manipulative and deceptive branding that actually works. And in another clip, Ben does something similar where he appeals to his audience in a very obvious way by bringing up more kind of contemporary right-wing narratives and talking points. For example, in this clip where he talks about the World Economic Forum.
So the head of Siemens and Maersk, of course, a major international shipping firm, his name is Jim Snabe. He says, you know what the best possible outcome here would be? We should all stop eating meat. 1 billion people need to stop eating meat right now. Yes, this sounds like it's going to make your life significantly better if you stop eating meat. I'm not eating the bugs, guys. It's not going to happen. I'm not going vegan. I'm not going vegetarian. Meat tastes good, and it's good for you.
But what really frustrates me here is when people tie in the consumption of bugs, plants, veganism, and vegetarianism all together. And it really annoys me that people go, I'm never going vegan because the World Economic Forum wants us to eat plants and bugs. Vegans don't want you to eat bugs. We do not want you to eat bugs. We don't want anyone eating bugs. We want to protect bugs. We don't want bugs to be farmed en masse and crushed and frozen to death and all of these things. No. We don't want you to eat bugs. And veganism and vegetarianism is not similar, okay? So when people say about reducing meat or taking meat out of your diet to protect the environment, that is not what veganism is. And so conflating veganism as an ethical philosophy with calls by the World World Economic Forum or by anyone to reduce meat consumption or to eat bugs because it's better for the planet is misrepresenting what veganism is. That is not what veganism is. And so that's the first thing I want to say. And it's actually really tiresome that veganism as an ethical ideology is being dragged into all of these theories and this misinformation and this speculation and this political discourse around things like the World Economic Forum, because the people at the World Economic Forum are not promoting veganism as an ethical philosophy. They're not talking about protecting animals and animal rights. That's not what they're doing. And so the World Economic Forum is not talking about veganism. It's not promoting the ethics of veganism. It's not even promoting the diet of veganism necessarily, because often what these people talk about is reducing meat or taking out red meat or doing things like that. So I think Ben is being disingenuous here by tying in veganism with these broader right-wing talking points, which are very topical at the moment. And Ben reveals something else quite interesting in this clip, because I think maybe I've been giving Ben a little bit too much credit. Maybe I've been saying the reason he's not vegan is because of these other sort of more philosophical or sociological ideas or whatever it may be. But in this clip, he just says, meat's good for you and meat tastes nice. And I think it's really telling that this is the argument that Ben jumps to. You know, in response to someone saying that the human population needs to eat less meat, he says, but meat tastes nice. Now, we as vegans hear this argument all the time, don't we? And the thing about this argument, and the thing about what Ben says here, is it's not well-reasoned. It's not morally interesting. It's actually morally very, very scary. It's not scientific, and it's certainly not sound. And I think this speaks volumes about Ben's actual reasons for not being vegan, which is he doesn't want to be vegan because he enjoys eating animals, because it's convenient for him to eat animals. In other words, he falls into the trap of just using these selfish arguments to justify doing something incredibly immoral, and something that he has admitted is immoral. And I think this clip reveals a lot about it, and probably about Ben's lack of conviction and personal weakness to make a change, because he's giving into feelings, right? Sensory pleasure is a feeling, but also the feeling that he doesn't want to change. He wants to eat meat. So he's giving into his feelings all the time when it comes to what we do to animals. But remember, this is the man that says, facts don't care about your feelings. But in other words, what he should be saying is, I only care about my feelings. Ben's argument is also incredibly illogical and flawed, because the basis for his argument is saying, because these people at this forum are saying I should eat less meat, I'm not going to do that. He's rejecting what they're saying, but he's not rejecting the ethics of veganism. He's not confronting the ethical obligation that underpins veganism. He's not doing that. Instead, he's almost attacking the messenger. And again, these people aren't the messengers for veganism, but they're the messengers for thinking about how we consume food. And so he's attacking the messenger, and in doing so, he's actually dismissing the ethical obligations that he has to think about this argument more rationally and objectively. But this is generally how I've seen Ben skirt around the ethical discourse about veganism. What he often does is he will instead focus on aspects of this conversation that he doesn't agree with, or he doesn't like, or doesn't align with his political identity. And instead he'll attack that rather than address the ethical discourse around veganism. For example, he does something similar when he talks about the environment as well.
You see the planet Earth moving towards what is standard American diet, Booker said. We've seen this massive increase in consumption of meat produced by the industrial animal agriculture industry. The tragic reality is this planet simply can't sustain billions of people consuming industrially produced animal agriculture because of environmental impact, he said. It's just not possible. Weird, because the planet a century ago had like 2 billion, 3 billion people. Now we have some 8 billion people. Most of those people are subsisting on a lot more meat than people were a century ago. Things are okay. Things are kind of okay. It turns out, you know what we're really good at doing? Growing cows, killing them, and eating them. And also they taste delicious. Now, this is coming from somebody who actually has a little bit of moral sympathy for the vegan position, or at least the vegetarian position. The position that animals have a certain level of sentience and killing them may be a morally questionable behavior. In 100 years, people may look back on us and say, wow, you were killing animals to eat them? That seems kind of barbaric. I actually have a little bit of sympathy for that position. Not enough sympathy to make me stop eating chicken or steak, but some sympathy at the very least. But Booker is doing this in the worst and stupidest possible way. He's saying the reason that you shouldn't eat meat is not for moral reasons because you have objections. You shouldn't eat meat because the planet can't sustain you eating meat. Except for, again, the population skyrocketing over the past 50 to 100 years. and people eating more meat, not less.
But again, when he does this, he is using his political ideology and his dislike of certain things to try and distance himself from veganism, the ethics of it, and of course, the ultimate obligation for him to be vegan. He can attack all this kind of extra detail around it because in doing so, it means that he can continue to rationalize to himself why he remains a hypocrite. But of course, look, while Ben's climate skepticism is certainly worth looking at with a curious eye and is certainly worth questioning, it's also kind of irrelevant to this particular conversation because you don't have to believe in the urgency of the climate crisis to be vegan. Because whilst veganism is undeniably one of the best things that we can do for the planet, that doesn't mean that you have to believe in the climate crisis to recognize why you need to be vegan. Because veganism is about the ethics. The byproduct of being kind to animals is that it's good for the planet, but the kindness to animals is not conditional on someone recognizing that it's good for the planet. So again, Benny's using his dislike of the climate crisis conversation to try and create distance from him having to acknowledge the ethical side of this conversation. So now I just want to show you all one final clip, because in this clip, Ben is talking more about the ethical side of veganism, but he's still using his personal dislikes to find distance between himself and the ultimate ethical realization that he should be having.
When it comes to PETA, for example, or some of the members of the environmental movement, if the alarmism actually undercuts support for ability to do things, meaning that it's enervating, there's this push on some parts of the radical environmentalist movement, as you see in the animal rights movement with PETA, where PETA will do Holocaust on your plate. My first reaction is, I'm going to go eat a bucket of chicken right now, because a chicken is not a human being. And when you say that this is like a Holocaust, my answer is no, it's not.
Now, I actually think that this clip is super interesting. And the first thing to establish straight away is that Ben is clearly offended and upset by the language and rhetoric that PETA has chosen to use. And I think the thing to bear in mind with this conversation is that it's irrelevant whether or not that offense is valid or not. Now, some people will think that Ben's feeling of offense is entirely valid, and some people will think that it's not valid. But that's really kind of irrelevant to this conversation, because the ethics of veganism, they're not about rhetoric and language. They're not about the campaigns that NGOs choose to run. That's not what defines the ethics of veganism or the morality of what we do to animals. Because the ethics of veganism, well, they're about animals, about what we do to animals. It's not about language or semantics or rhetoric. That's irrelevant when it comes to deciding what is right or wrong to do to animals. Now, of course, we use language to convey emotive topics and to be persuasive. And some might argue that certain language is not persuasive over others. But it's not about the language that we choose to use. That's not what defines the morality of veganism. It might define the effectiveness of the messenger, but not the ethics that underpin the message they're trying to convey. And so even if Ben is entirely valid and his offense is entirely reasonable and justifiable, that doesn't make his consumption of animals reasonable or justifiable. Now, it's also important to remember that PETA is obviously a human-run organization, run by humans, led by humans, and the campaigns are created, devised, and spread by humans. So we have a human-run organization that have put out a campaign, and that has offended Ben's feelings. And so because Ben's feelings have been offended, his response is to say that he will want to now eat a bucket of chickens or eat a large number of dead chickens. And so what Ben is saying is that he wants to punish non-human animals for the actions of humans. These non-human animals have done nothing wrong. They are the victims, they are vulnerable, and they are those who ethically we should be looking to help. He wants to punish them because of the actions of humans, or more importantly, because of the feeling of offense that he feels because of the actions of other humans. Now, to be fair to Ben, he does backtrack a little bit on this, but I think it's interesting that initially, that's the thing that he jumps to.
Well, I would say a couple of things. First of all, my instinct isn't the same as yours. I don't rush off to eat the chicken. I would rush off to condemn PETA's rhetoric.
Right. I hear.
No, I don't have a reflexive.
I think that's fair.
Because look, what Ben should say is, I don't agree with this use of language. These are the reasons I don't agree with the use of language, but nonetheless, I should still think about the overall message that's being portrayed. Even if I don't agree with the terminology specifically that's being used, intellectually, I know that there is something else at play here, and I should still be thinking about what else is at play here, and I should still be engaging with the broader moral topic being presented, irrelevant to whether or not I'm offended by the choice of terminology that this one organization has chosen to use. And Ben still fails to do that because, of course, Ben still isn't vegan. So that brings me to the end of the video. Thank you so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. I do think Ben's an interesting character in this particular conversation, but I would love to know what you think. So let me know down below in the comments. Have you enjoyed this video? Do you think that Ben should go vegan? Is there an argument I've overlooked? Is there something else that Ben has said about veganism that I didn't mention that you think is worth bringing up? Let me know down below in the comments because I'd love to know what you guys think. And of course, thank you so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. A huge thank you to Wild for partnering with me on this video. And importantly, I look forward to seeing all of you in the next video.